Okay, let's dive in. Imagine this. You build this massive world-changing company, right? But your core belief, the thing driving you, isn't making money. It's service and the profit. Well, that's just something that happens if you do the service part really well. It sounds almost kind of upside down compared to how a lot of businesses think today, doesn't it?
It really does.
Yeah.
It completely challenges that whole narrative that it's all about the quarterly results and, shareholder value above everything else.
Exactly. So welcome everyone to this deep dive. We're going deep today, looking at not just a historical figure, but a really foundational thinker who just radically changed industry and how we think about work itself.
And our source material is fantastic for this. It's excerpts from My Life and Work by Henry Ford and Samuel Crowther. It's like getting Ford's own perspective, unfiltered.
Yeah, it's him laying out his whole philosophy, his experiments, what frustrated him, his vision for, well, not just Ford Motor Company, but for work, for society, even the financial system. It's way broader than just, the assembly line.
Definitely. The mission for us here is to really get past that famous innovation and dig into the core ideas, the maybe surprising insights, the practical lessons, and, some of the views that are pretty controversial, all in his own words from this text.
We're pulling out the key bits, from manufacturing details right up to his big picture social ideas, all through his, let's say, unique lens.
And right off the bat, you get that core philosophical challenge you mentioned, which is just fascinating.
He doesn't really hold back, does he? Business, he says, it exists for service, not just profit.
Profit is the result, he argues. The result of good service, not the main aim.
And he connects that right into, living life. He suggests that enjoying life, the pleasant stuff, shouldn't be pushed aside by, the grind of earning a living.
Right. All the tools of business, the power, the machines, the money, the goods, they aren't the point. They're just means.
Means to what?
Means to set us free, essentially. Free to actually live better, fuller lives.
That's a big shift in thinking. And he was pretty critical of the way things were generally done in his time. The prevailing system, as he calls it. What were his main beefs with it?
Well, he saw it as just inherently wasteful. It stopped people, he felt, from getting the full reward for the service they actually provided.
He called it going nowhere, didn't he?
Yeah, basically because it lacked a solid foundation, a real plan. It desperately needed better planning, better adjustment.
It's interesting because you think, okay, Henry Ford, massive fortune, it must have been about the money for him personally, right? But the source says otherwise.
He actually addresses that. He says, look, selfishly, the system worked fine for him, financially speaking. He had plenty of money. But his motivation, or at least how he presents it here, wasn't just personal wealth.
It was service.
Driven by this idea of service, yeah. And a belief that his way of doing things could genuinely make the world, a better place.
And then the success of Ford Motor Company becomes his proof. See, this theory works. Focusing on service first actually leads to huge success.
Exactly. It wasn't just some nice idea. It's a practical business model that, changed everything. And this focus on principles, it shows up everywhere in the text.
Okay, let's get into those principles. The stuff about fear in the past really jumps out.
Totally. He talks about needing an absence of fear of the future and also an absence of, worshiping the past.
Fear holds you back, he thought.
Big time. And failure. That's not the end. It's just, a chance to start over, but smarter this time, using what you learned. The only disgrace is being afraid to fail.
That's so different from, constantly looking back or being scared of what might happen. What about competition? His view there was unusual, too.
Yeah, really interesting. He basically says, disregard competition in the usual sense. Don't focus on beating the other guy.
So what then?
His idea was whoever does something the best, they should just be the one doing it. Trying to, forcibly take business away from someone else, he saw that as almost criminal because you're hurting others just for your own gain.
So it's less about fighting rivals and more about perfecting your own thing.
Exactly. Put all that energy into getting better yourself, making your own product or service so good that competition just isn't the main issue. He saw that as way more powerful. And underpinning all this, of course, is work. Hard work.
Work seems almost spiritual for him in this text.
It really does. He uses words like sanity, self-respect, salvation, even calls it the greatest blessing. He believed real social justice comes from honest work. Contribute a lot, you should get a lot back.
And he said the employer should work harder than the workers.
Yeah, that's in there. A pretty strong statement about leadership. And tied to all this is that constant drive for improvement.
Never satisfied, always thinking it could be better.
Right. He calls it a spirit of crowding, like it pushes people, forces them into higher places to achieve more.
And these weren't just ideas floating around. They directly impacted how he actually built the first car and then the company. Let's talk about those early days the source describes.
It definitely started small. The source mentions him working on a double-cylinder engine way back in 1890.
He took that job at Detroit Electric, partly for the money, but also...
Also to get away from the farm, yeah. And crucially, to get access to electricity and machine tools for his own experiments after hours.
In that little brick shed behind the house. Working nights, weekends. He says work with interest is never hard.
And by 92, maybe early 93, he had the first car running. Yeah. The source paints a picture, right? Kind of like a buggy.
Yeah, 2 cylinders from an exhaust pipe, maybe 4 horsepower, belt and chain drive, 2 speeds.
10 and 20 miles per hour, roughly. And stopping was release the clutch, hit the foot brake, no reverse.
He just didn't go backwards?
Pretty much. He used what he knew from steam tractors for some parts, like transmission and steering, and then he hit that classic engineering problem, the compensating gear.
Ah, yes, the differential. Explain that simply for us.
Okay, so when you turn a corner, the outside wheel has to go further than the inside one, right? The compensating gear, or differential, lets those wheels on the same axle spin at different speeds. Without it, turning is jerky, wheels slip or bind. Absolutely vital.
And the first car weighed about 500 pounds. Big challenges were spark timing and just keeping the weight down.
And cooling. Initially air-cooled, but it overheated fast. Needed a water jacket and tank. But maybe the biggest takeaway from this early phase is his method.
What about it?
He really hammers this point. Draw a detailed plan first. Work out every single detail before you build anything.
To avoid mistakes later.
Yeah, to avoid makeshifts, make sure the whole design hangs together, prevent wasted time and materials. He felt a lot of inventors failed because they just messed around, experimented without that rigorous planning phase first.
Plan first, then build. Sounds simple, but clearly a core discipline for him. He also mentions struggling to get the right materials and tools early on.
Which, leads perfectly into the next big leap, getting serious about materials and production, like with vanadium steel.
Right, that shift from just making a car to making lots of good cars. Yeah. The source tells that story about the race crash.
Yeah, down in Palm Beach. He sees this broken valve stem from a wrecked French car. And it's tiny, light, but incredibly strong. He tells his assistant, basically, find out what this is made of.
And it turns out to have vanadium in it, but nobody in America was making steel like that.
Nope, they couldn't find anyone. So what do? They actually bring an expert over from England who knows how to make it.
Wow.
Then they had to convince a small steel company in Canton, Ohio to even try it. The source mentions the first attempt, the first heat, was a total failure. But the second one worked.
And the impact, huge, right? The strength.
Phenomenal. Tensile strengths jump from maybe 60, 70,000 pounds per square inch up to 170,000. Think about that. Same strength, much lighter part, or way stronger for the same weight. It changed everything from making cars lighter, tougher, and more efficient.
And this wasn't just a one-off. It led to a whole scientific approach to materials at Ford.
Absolutely. The source says they pioneered figuring out the exact type and quality of steel needed for every single part. They ended up using like 20 different kinds, maybe 10 based on vanadium, each tweaked for wear or springiness or whatever it needed.
He even mentions a test against a French car part, and the Ford steel was stronger.
Right. So the focus shifted, not just building a car, but building a reliable, durable one. That's why they focused on endurance trials, not just speed races early on. Scotland, Brighton, climbing Ben Nevis.
Showing they could take punishment.
And he directly links that proven toughness to their early sales success, especially overseas. People saw these things last.
This is also when the production methods really started evolving towards mass production, but the source says it wasn't like flipping a switch.
No, definitely gradual. Making the Model T engine in-house was a start. The big savings, the big economies, began in assembly, then spread out to other areas.
And his idea about skilled workers was key here.
Totally. Instead of skilled mechanics doing everything, they became the tool designers, the process guys. They built the machines and figured out the systems that let less skilled workers do specific repetitive tasks easily and quickly.
So the skill shifted into the design of the work itself.
Exactly. He says the rank and file workers came in unskilled, learned their one job in hours or days, didn't need immense strength for many tasks anymore. They could hire more broadly.
They also just ignored traditional ways of doing things sometimes, right? Like in the foundry.
Oh, yeah. Pouring iron straight from the furnace into molds. using endless chains, stuff the old-timers said you couldn't or shouldn't do. He kind of liked, as he put it, letting fools rush in where experts saw problems.
Which brings us to his view on experts. He wasn't a huge fan.
Not of the kind who thought they knew everything. He felt those types just saw past failures as reasons not to try. A real expert to him knows there's always more to learn, always a better way, and is always pushing forward. They don't consider themselves the expert.
The foundry transformation described is a perfect example. From heavy manual labor, lots of skilled guys,
To mostly machinery, maybe only 5% skilled molders setting things up, and 95% unskilled guys doing one specific task.
Wow.
Everything moving, pouring metal on the go, automatic cleaning.
And that piston rod assembly example really nails the method.
It's brilliant. Old way. 28 guys, 2 benches, walking around getting parts, making maybe 175 assemblies a day.
New way.
Break it down into 3 steps, put it on a moving slide. Guys on each side do just 1 step. And crucially, they don't have to move their feet.
Bringing the work to the worker.
Exactly. Cuts the team down eventually to just 7 guys, making 2,600 assemblers a day. The efficiency gain is just mind-blowing.
And it wasn't just the stations, it was the whole factory layout.
Yeah, cutting down travel distance for parts massively, like 4,000 feet down to 300 for a cylinder casting.
Yeah.
Eliminating manual handling, automating machines, packing equipment tightly because every square foot costs money.
The key ideas being, divide the work, keep it moving, and design parts for easy making from the start.
And the result. He calculated that at their current production rate, using the old 1903 methods, they'd need over 200,000 assembly workers. Instead, they were doing it with fewer than 50,000 people for 4,000 cars a day.
Incredible numbers. But like we said, it wasn't just about the metal and the machines. He had strong ideas about the people, the workers.
Absolutely. And his thoughts on managing people, promotion, wages, and that's another whole fascinating layer in the source.
Fewer titles, he said. So how did people get ahead?
He suggested it was more organic. If you showed you could do better work, you just started doing it. You weren't waiting for a specific job opening. The best people kind of created their own roles. Promotion wasn't a formal ladder. You did new work, you got more pay.
There was a rating system, though.
Yeah, apparently designed to make foremen judge purely on performance, not personality. If a foreman picked badly or managed poorly, it supposedly showed up in the department's numbers.
His take on what motivated the average worker is blunt.
Yeah, he basically says most guys just wanted a steady job, not necessarily advancement. He estimated maybe only 5% really wanted the extra responsibility. Becoming a straw boss was often just for the extra cash. Finding people willing to be promoted was the hard part, he claims.
That's quite a statement, and it connects to that intense focus on tiny cost savings, right?
It does. Saving even a fraction of a cent on millions of parts adds up hugely. Like a cent saved on one part could be $12,000 a year back then. They'd make changes if the payback was within, say, 3 months.
But here's the interesting twist again. He links saving money directly to making the work better for the worker.
He says many efficiency changes also aim to eliminate the really hard, man-killing jobs. And he explicitly connects decency with good business making work less brutal, often lowered costs too.
They even rigorously costed out whether to make or buy parts, and he had this idea about creative work too.
Yeah, that creativity isn't just for artists. Industry needs artists, masters of method people, who can creatively design systems for a better life, not just pretty things. Good intentions aren't enough. You need smart design.
And improving worker well-being wasn't about less work, but enabling more productive work through machines. He even looked into repetitive labor.
And said their studies didn't show it was inherently harmful. He tells that story about the guys doing super monotonous jobs for years who actually didn't want to change. He notes people could switch if they asked, but most resisted changes they didn't initiate themselves. It suggests a range of preferences.
Which leads us to maybe the most famous part of his HR thinking, the high wage.
He argues the high wage starts right there on the shop floor. It's not charity. It's recognizing that a good worker gives their best, and they can only do that if they aren't constantly worried about money.
The source says if the job covers basic needs, plus a bit extra for comfort, for family opportunities, then the worker is free to focus and give their best. Job satisfaction itself is part of the pay.
And wages were like prepaid profit sharing, but with the idea that if the business did even better, more should be paid out. Everyone shares in the success.
And then came the big one, the $5 day in 1914.
A voluntary move, the source emphasizes. Doubled the typical wage for many, cut the workday to 8 hours, the week to 48. He called it social justice, something done partly for his own satisfaction in helping people.
But not charity. He's very clear on that.
Very. He got huge criticism from other employers for messing up the wage standards, for not just paying the bare minimum. His response: those old standards had to go if you wanted to end poverty. It wasn't just generosity, it was building a secure foundation. Low-wage businesses are insecure, he argued.
And the effect on turnover was massive.
Just incredible. Before, they hired 53,000 people a year just to keep 14,000 working there. After, in 1915, only about 6,500 hires, mostly for growth. Turnover plummeted. It saved them hiring hundreds of thousands a year later on.
So the principle worked. Pay people enough so they aren't worried, and it actually pays off for the business.
He says it straight out. It pays. Paying good wages was the most profitable thing they did in the long run.
He also mentions moving away from things like bonuses based on conduct, seeing that as paternalistic.
Yeah, he felt that kind of prying into workers' lives was outdated. Help and counsel, sure, but things like high wages and participation are much better for solidifying the business than, company picnics or welfare checks. The method changed, but the principal worker financial security stayed.
Okay, so moving beyond the factory walls now. The source shows Ford had some really big critiques of the whole economic system, some pretty radical ideas for how society could work better.
He definitely saw problems. He talks about business always being feast or famine, good times or bad times. This crazy situation where the world needs goods, the factories are ready to make them, but there's this money barrier in between. No stability.
And the idea of overproduction, he didn't buy it.
Not really. He argued it wasn't overproduction. It was usually making the wrong stuff headless production, or making stuff too expensive because of bad manufacturing or financing.
So bad business was down to bad management, not fate.
That was his view. Bad management and a messed up financial structure. He thought the war had really shown how shaky businesses were if they were just built on money games, not solid service and production.
He wasn't calling for revolution, though, but more like reshaping things gradually.
Exactly. You can't just flip the financial system overnight. But you can start running businesses based on service first. And he believed a better financial system would naturally follow from that. Individuals start, others follow. Make boom and bust cycles preventable, like diseases.
He also hated the waste of seasonal work, like construction shutting down in winter.
Yeah, and skilled guys stuck in factories when they could be building houses in the spring.
Which led to that really interesting idea about mixing farming and industry.
Right. Get rid of the slack time. Farmers work in factories in the winter. Factory workers maybe work on the land during slow periods. Balance things out, use energy better, lower the cost of living.
He actually set up a valve plant out in the country for that purpose.
Yeah, so workers could farm too. He argued modern machines made farming quicker, and water power meant factories didn't have to be in huge cities. Envision these farmer industrialists working in better conditions.
This connects to his dislike of too much centralization.
Definitely. He thought railroads had pushed centralization too far, often just for double business. Hauling raw materials one way, finished goods back the other way. Pointless hauling.
His solution was decentralization, like back to basics, but with modern tech.
Pretty much. Instead of giant factories far away, have smaller ones right where the raw materials are. Mills near the grain, packing plants near the livestock, cotton mills near the fields. Not revolutionary, he said, just common sense, making communities more self-sufficient, less reliant on costly transport.
And the farmer becomes more of a processor, not just a grower.
Exactly. Turn grain into flour, cattle into beef right there, less burden on transport, better system, lower costs. He saw it starting to happen, but wanted it to be way more common.
His view on the railroads themselves was pretty harsh in the source.
Oh, yeah. He saw them as totally controlled by finance, by bankers focused on speculation, not service, not enough reinvestment, constant debt problems, frequent bankruptcies.
He basically says throwing more money at them wouldn't fix it, just continue the bad habits.
And he points out how they actively killed off competition, like buying and destroying canals.
His thoughts on the wider financial system are cautious but critical.
Yeah, he admits it needs careful experimentation, not dogma. Sees it as economic, not political. Thinks people want sound money. But the system itself encourages bad behavior, fantastic tricks, hidden by jargon. He figures it'll eventually have to change due to real-world pressures.
And he thinks bankers should be doing more than just local stuff.
They should understand the whole system, he argues, and kick out the gamblers and bank balances. Banking should be a public service.
And he links financial issues directly to big problems like poverty and war.
He suggests money stringency, and the rivalry it fuels are root causes, calls them preventable evils.
He tackles poverty and privilege head-on too, calls them unnatural.
But says the solution is work, not laws. Poverty isn't solved by leveling down, which just makes everyone poor. It's solved by creating plenty through production and distribution. He accepts people are unequal in ability. The system has to deal with that.
He's also skeptical about organized charity.
Seems to question the sort of commercialization of it. Real helping, he suggests, is more personal people looking after orphans, the elderly, friends.
And he even applied his factory thinking to healthcare, with the Ford Hospital example.
Right. Criticizing hospitals built for doctors, not patients. His aim for equal treatment, fixed costs covering everything, designed for efficiency like a factory, saving nurses steps.
His idea was, if work provides enough for everyone, charity becomes less needed, and those resources can go into more production.
Making things cheaper, more plentiful, removing burdens, freeing people up, creating more wealth. Calls for constructive thinking, economic education for everyone. Ignorance fuels bad demands from both capital and labor, he thinks. You can't live beyond what's produced.
And the underlying problem behind so much of this, for him, was fear.
Yeah, fear born from relying on outside things, the foreman, the market, etc. It's acknowledging your life is controlled by circumstances. Banish fear through self-reliance, and charity becomes less necessary.
Okay, shifting one last time. The source also gives us Ford's views on things like education, sticking with things, and some very sensitive topics that we need to handle carefully, just reporting what the source says.
Right. On education, his view is very practical. An able man is someone who can do things. Education isn't just facts and degrees, it's learning how to think.
Which he calls hard work.
He does. He warns against dismissing education, but also against degree snobbery. School teaches about the past, but real education, he feels, comes from life, from doing things, often after school. Sometimes, he suggests, it's better not to be weighed down by too much past knowledge when trying something new.
Perseverance is huge for him, too.
Yeah, he thinks more people just give up than actually fail. Success takes stick-to-itiveness, giving it everything you've got. Failure is easy, success is hard. But, he adds, success is pretty meaningless if it's not in something useful or positive.
He was strongly against war as well.
Adamantly. Said it settles nothing, just messes up the world. Argued that real patriots don't profit from war, and those war fortunes were becoming less respectable. Business needs peace, he thought. War stifles invention.
He even had a theory about who causes wars.
He suggests some powerful, hidden international group deliberately creates panic using governments, media, psychology, all to grab more power while everyone else is distracted and sacrificing, like a gambler yelling fire to cover his escape with the loot.
Foreign trade, he had reservations there, too.
Saw it as often based on illusions. Wished every nation could be self-sufficient. Thought countries should help each other manufacture, but focus on non-competitive areas, like trading tropical goods for temperate ones.
He didn't like the focus on exports over domestic needs.
Felt it made nations dependent, turned populations into factory fodder, created a small rich class, and neglected internal development. Said the U.S. had enough work at home for 100 years, no point sitting idle waiting for foreign orders. Notes they stopped war production instantly after the armistice. Oh, okay. Now, as we noted earlier, the source document includes commentary that requires very careful, neutral handling. There's a section titled Studies in the Jewish Question. According to the source text itself, Ford stated this was his response to what he perceived as a deterioration in culture, entertainment, conduct, and business, describing it as nasty Orientalism. The text further states Ford claimed these influences were traceable to one racial source. Within the source, Ford's stated motive is presented not as prejudice, but as concern for civilizational principles and a desire to challenge these perceived influences. The text acknowledges steps taken by intelligent people of the race in question against violators, but adds Ford's view, as presented in the source, that they still needed to discard ideas of racial superiority maintained by economic or intellectually subversive warfare upon Christian society. Again, we are strictly reporting the content and stated rationale as presented in the source text. Attributing these views to that text and Ford's perspective is documented there without adding any external commentary, validation, or endorsement.
Understood. The source also covers his stance on labor unions.
Right. He says no antagonism, but also no formal deals. His reasoning, as written, was that Ford's wages and hours were better than anything unions could reasonably ask for, so membership offered his workers nothing. Said he didn't know or care if they were members.
He distinguished between good union aims and bad ones.
Yes, respected good aims, denounced bad ones. Said there were no real attempts by unions to get between management and his workforce, calling agitators human oddities.
He had a specific critique of union leaders and strikes.
His view in the text is that leaders needed unrest and strikes to stay relevant, to say you still need us. He thought strikes just made things worse for everyone, win or lose. Argued if workers just refused to strike, employers would have to fix problems themselves.
And he was against anyone profiting from stirring up trouble.
Yeah, said some outfits seem to just exist to keep dissatisfaction going with false promises.
He acknowledges human flaws, selfishness, greed are universal, right? Not just in one group.
Yes, but he believed the economic system could be set up to rob that selfishness of its power to cause major economic harm.
Ultimately, the source shows his deep belief in the potential of the planet and the system.
That Earth can provide enough, and that it is possible to organize work, production, distribution, reward for genuine justice. His system, he felt, could overcome some of those human failings.
So bringing it all back around, the source finishes by restating that core vision of business.
As a profession, like medicine or law, but older, more vital, its purpose. Service, not profit. It needs ethics, integrity, self-policing. He believes it will eventually become clean, its faults seen as internal problems to fix.
And he hits those key tenets again. No fear, no worship of the past, learn from failure, focus on being the best, not crushing others. The past is only useful for figuring out how to move forward.
Yeah, this deep dive into my life and work, just based on these excerpts, gives you such a rich, complex picture of his thinking, straight from the source. Much more than just cars. It's this whole integrated vision mechanics, organization, people, society, finance.
It really highlights a perspective driven by efficiency, yes, but also this deep belief in hard work, smart planning, worker well-being, all under that umbrella of service first.
Definitely leaves you with a lot to think about, especially comparing his ideas to how things are run today.
Absolutely. So let's leave you with this question to chew on, based on what we've explored directly from the source today. How much of what Henry Ford was advocating for here, from the purpose of business itself, how workers should be treated, his ideas about integrating industry and farming, even his views on education, how much of that still feels relevant, maybe even radical in our world right now?